To this second session of WFS Live, powered by Ronaldo on this opening day. Now, before we introduce the four ladies that you can see with me, let me just give you a little bit of context here. Tomorrow, it will be exactly a year since the 2019 Women's World Cup final in France. It was a scintillating, groundbreaking, trailblazing tournament for women's football. It was watched by 1.12 billion viewers overall. It was a real display of female excellence in football, but of course, it extends far beyond the field of play and far beyond the women's game as well. There are plenty of super female execs across men's football too. Take, for example, Marina Graevskaya at Chelsea, Susan Whelan at Leicester. Both of those are chief executives at Premier League clubs. Also think of Victoria Pavón at Leganés, Amaya Gorostiza at Eibar. They are both presidents at La Liga clubs. Fatma Samora, who is, of course, the current FIFA Secretary General. And, of course, on the pitch, well, we all know about players like Megan Rapinoe, but also Stephanie Frappart, who has refereed a UEFA Super Cup final, and Chen Yun-ting, the first woman to coach a men's professional top-flight team. But why stop there? More still can and has to be done. So this next session is entitled Women's Leadership in Global Football in partnership with Visa. We are delighted to have with us four ladies who are changing the game for the better and to helping global football become as inclusive and as diverse as possible. We have Senior Advisor at J. Stern & Co, Ebru Koksal. We have Strategic Global Marketing Coordinator at Udinese Calcio, Magda Pozzo. We have the Head of Professional Football at FIFA, Ornella Desiree. And your moderator, freelance broadcaster and co-founder of the Offside podcast, Lynsey Hooper. Lynsey, it's a pleasure to be working with you once again. Very much looking forward to this. Take it away.
Thank you very much, David. And yes, you're right to say that there's a lot we can learn from these ladies, and we're going to learn from the best indeed over the next 45 minutes. You can post questions and you can check out the polls that are live at the moment. And we're starting with a very important one. Has women's sport been hit harder by COVID-19 than men's sports? And it's simply A for yes, B for no, and we'll address that later on. But I want to start by welcoming in Magda, Ornella and Ebru to the panel. And just to start, I would like to know your first role in football, each of you, and also more about the current role that you're doing at the moment. If we start with Ebru.
Hi, everybody. Well, I'm originally an investment banker, and in 2000, I joined a private equity fund in Turkey. And on the first day of the job, they sent me to a meeting with Galatasaray. The president of the club at the time was my former mergers and acquisitions M&A client, and we started talking about a partnership, and 8 months later, the fund bought 20% shares in Galatasaray, and I had just delivered my second child. My kids are a year and a half apart, and my boss at the fund said to me, with two very young children, you cannot keep up with the pace of the fund anymore, so we will recommend you to Galatasaray as an interim CFO. So over the weekend, I had the dilemma of opening a court case and suing them for discrimination versus taking a chance and going into the exciting world of football. And 20 years later, I'm still in football, so obviously it was the right choice. I joined as an interim CFO, and 6 months later, I became the managing director of the marketing company. 20 years later, I'm still involved in football, very much, obviously. I work with J. Stern & Co, and we, besides wealth management, we also provide financing to football clubs. And my heart, of course, lies with women in football. I'm the chair, and we're trying to help thousands of women to enter the industry, survive, thrive, and I'm sure I'll have a chance to talk about it more as the discussion progresses.
Fantastic. And also worth pointing out, we are all live, which is why you can hear sirens and things when they go off. We can't control that, but we did hear you loud and clear. So that's great, Ebru, for starting us off. Ornella, can we bring you in? What was your journey?
Yeah, hello everyone. Hi, Lynsey. Good morning, everybody. So actually, my love story with football started when I was 5 years old, and my father took me to a football game, my hometown football club, Calcio Catania. And in that year was the World Cup in Italy. So I really fell in love with football, and actually, my story started there. After 20 years, I got a job in that football club in Calcio Catania. It was a mid-sized club. It was actually the head coach was Diego Simeone. It was a nice club and whatever, but at that time it was still run as a family business. So we were less than 10 people working at the club. I was doing the legal affair manager, but at the same time I was working in marketing, communication, assisting the CEO when there was a transfer of a player, and also picking up the phone at the reception. So I was doing a lot at that time, and it was a great experience. So I started my career there. Then I decided to quit the job after 2 years because as a woman, especially in a club, in the south of Italy, in Sicily, was quite challenging. So I decided to move away from football, and I worked for a law firm in London. But then after a while, I realized that I was giving up on my dream, of working in football. So I started again working in the industry. So I worked for some law firms, with a Brazilian law firms with Marcos Motta, who is also speaker of this event. Then in another law firm in Barcelona, and then I moved to Switzerland, where I worked for the European leagues, an organization comprising all the top five, all the top leagues in Europe, including the top five, the Premier League, La Liga, and German Bundesliga, Italian Serie A, and so on. And then last year in September, I got this amazing job opportunity at FIFA as head of professional football. As head of professional football, I'm actually in the department which is the contact point between FIFA and the football stakeholders, so the clubs, leagues, players. We lead the football stakeholder committee, which is a consultative body in charge of making all the changes to the football regulatory framework. And so that's all.
Lovely. And Magda, what was your first role in football? And we now know that you're at Udinese and Watford.
Yes, well, I start from power tools and woodworking machinery business, so totally different.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Of course, my family owns both teams, Watford and Udinese. So, like about 12 years ago, I entered the football business, and I'm the group strategic marketing coordinator, especially involved with Udinese and the most innovative projects. And so, yes, been quite excited because I think it was very, very interesting and very good to have already a commercial and marketing background, and to somehow transmit it in football, which is a completely different sector. But I think there are so many things that we can implement.
Very different backgrounds then for all of you, which shows there are so many different paths for you to get where you want to be if you want to be a future leader in football. Ebru, let's talk about failures for a second, because everyone will go through their career and think that there's a time when they didn't do so well, but it's how you react to that and how you then move on. Can you give us an example of a time when that happened and how you responded to it?
Sure, and thank you for asking that question, because a lot of the panels make you only talk about the successes and the important milestones in your career, but it's really, really crucial that we also talk about failures. Nobody's careers are a straight path, and the most important thing is what you learn from them. So as I explained, I joined Galatasaray in 2001, and my career just took off really fast, especially towards the end of the decade. Starting in 2008, I became responsible from the new stadium project, which we finished in a very short period of time, opened it in 2010. We merged all our three companies, marketing, stadium, and football companies, into one. It was a very complicated capital markets transaction with reverse takeover of the parent company. I raised the financing for it. I was named the Executive of the Year by Stadium Business Awards. I then ran for office at the European Club Association, first woman to ever try. This is even before FIFA, UEFA, any of the governing bodies had a female executive board member. And to everybody's surprise, I won the election, and in 2010 joined the European Club Association board. So I was on a roll. Everything was going so perfect, so well. And I then got offered to become the General Secretary of the Turkish Football Federation, which obviously for a football loving country like Turkey, but also equally male dominant, it was an amazing opportunity. I hesitated a lot, mainly because that was the year of the match fixing investigations in Turkey, and especially because of my long history and background in Galatasaray, which was not involved at all in the match fixing investigations. It was not one of the implicated clubs. I knew something would go wrong, but nevertheless, I accepted the job because it was a huge honor. I was going to be among the three female general secretaries in the world. There was never, any presidents at the time, only two general secretaries. But things didn't go as expected. The president who recruited me, he resigned after 2 months. The elections took place, and to make the long story short, I didn't get along with the new president. So 4 months, 5 days after this dream job, I was out of the federation. And my job at Galatasaray was taken. And to make matters worse, there was a huge social media defamation campaign against me. I started receiving death threats. So that was probably the lowest point in my career. And it took me a while to bounce back. And when I look back, I guess the most important learnings from that is I didn't have a good support mechanism. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a personal board of directors. I didn't have anyone to go to. I was all alone. In any case, as a female, 10 years ago, you are one of the very, very few in the world anyways. It's so difficult to survive. Everybody is trying to crush you in a way. And unless you have support mechanisms, it's very difficult to survive in that kind of an environment. But also equally important is having the self-awareness in your leadership journey, knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and making sure that you are improving on your personal development front, on your leadership skills, on any other skills that you're missing, because this is a very, very competitive and tough industry, and you have to be at the top of your game with every aspect of it, whether it's knowledge in a specific segment like finance or marketing or strategy or governance, or whether it's how you communicate with people or how you lead people. So that then turned into a passion for me, because I realized that I wasn't the only woman in the world having troubles surviving in the industry. And I went and took a course at Harvard on authentic leadership development, and we worked out a great leadership program at FIFA for women working around the world. And between 2015 and 17, we led leadership courses in 52 countries for FIFA. So it was an amazing experience. But the most important is, again, self-awareness and building the support network to make sure that you're able to weather these kinds of storms.
Self-awareness, building that network, very important to do both of those. Magda, let's bring you in at this point, because you'll have seen how the football landscape has changed. How do you think it's changed for the better and opened up more opportunities for people?
Well, I think, when I first started into the football business, it was a completely different thing, because its strategies were essentially based on game results, and everything was the pitch and nothing else. And I think we have, I think it's been a tremendous development in strategy, focus, and objectives in general. Well, of course, football is still the heart, but the mean is to cover innovative projects, And so if we consider just the main three club revenues, which are broadcasting, commercial, and match days, only looking at these three, three main areas, there is such a great evolution. There are so many new issues involved. Just to mention some, the stadium, the creation of content, the creation of worldwide academies, franchising, media digitalization, esports, update hospitality, CRM, fan engagement. I mean, there are so many concepts we can mention. So I think if we think about it, if I think about that, only 10 years ago, all these concepts were almost disregarded. And I think because of this, it is quite natural that there are much more opportunities for women. And because now football is linked to very innovative subjects, I think, it's, and we can be very pragmatic, and we are not so emotional about only the sport results. And I think it's really, I feel very comfortable, much more comfortable than 10 years ago. So I think this is really my main feeling.
We've actually had a question on this subject. So if I can come back to you, Magda, because Melina's got in touch saying, how can we make sure more women are included in decision-making positions in European football?
That's a good question. Well, I think we are getting there, because personally, I get interviews with more and more women in the football business. That 10 years ago, maybe only 2 or 3 women would appear in 100 people.
Which is nothing. Yeah.
But I think we need to do more as women, and we need to create a movement for that, So, but I think it's just the natural development of the business. So I think, as I said, it has changed with so many new innovative areas which women are very good at, which I think, is going to become very natural. And I'm very positive and very optimistic about that. And maybe Ornella will help me in that.
Well, I'm going to bring Ornella in, actually, because I know that there are so many positives to women, but let's try and also face these barriers that sometimes we put up for ourselves. So let's address the fact that this myth, rather, than you have to have 100% of the criteria in order to go for a role. And we've seen this time and time again. It comes up quite often. So is it ourselves? Are we our own biggest block, the fact that we're not putting ourselves forward enough?
Yeah, personally, I would agree with that notion that we tend to have this feeling of not being enough good. I experience that myself every time. And actually, I think it's an asset, because it really pushed me towards being always the best version of myself, always striving to excellence, so I think it's a positive thing, because I'm never confident enough that something will be done in the perfect way. So I want to always improve. And I think this is something that is in the DNA of us as women. And I think, men don't have any lack of confidence. Is the opposite. They are super overconfident, I would say. And maybe this is also what makes us somehow different, somehow special. So really, I think that it's not just about being more confident. It's also about try to dare to question more the status quo and see things in a different way, rather than just accept the way they are. So unfortunately, the lack of confidence of women, it's an issue, so we have to get better on that. And I think it's also something which can be related to your previous question, because if you lack of confidence, of course, you won't manage to get to a leadership position.
I think the overwhelming response, by the way, to that first poll that we put forward is yes, that women's sport has been affected more by COVID-19 than men's sport. So I think we pick that up next. Off the back of that, Ornella, I'll bring in Magda, because I wanted to speak to you about what football's learned from COVID-19. How will we respond next time? Is there a way that we can learn from this year in case of future events?
I think we football has learned to be even more flexible and creative in this situation. I think there has been a first feeling of safeguard, and to that we were all worried about our lives. and then immediately into in our livelihoods and business, and to be, afraid to lose, let's say, our security, And so in our case, we start to implement, and in this, I feel directly involved in all this process, because I felt like I had to, let's say, to give some support to our, supporters, to our partners. So we implemented some very, I think, different activities for the kids in the house, but it was quite quick. So with all this smart working and motivational courses for our players and their families, even growing courses, motivational and business courses for our partners. But it was a mean to make them feel in a family and to make them feel that we were there, even in such a, tragical, let's say, event. So I think I do not want to look pretentious, but I think I wouldn't do anything different. Let's say I'm very happy with what we did, but I think we learned to be even more flexible and to be ready to implement, let's say, crisis plans, not only for sportive or sport reason, but also for natural catastrophes that nobody expected. So I really think what we have been doing is that we are really thinking daily, weekly, and and monthly, which maybe it's true that we were used to do it for the sport, and for the result reason, but not for this reason. So I think, of course, then you realize how important is technology, and how important, for instance, now that the stadiums are closed, and to try to give anyway the fun experience to all the fans, and even to develop it internationally, which only the big clubs have been involved with that, but maybe the smaller clubs have not. So I think this is something we have been doing, and we need to focus on that. And I think as well that we need to try to be optimistic, and we have to try to prepare our stadium for with the right procedures and with the safety procedures, and to try to get back the people at least with a 30% capability of the full capacity of the stadium. But I think there are so many good messages involved, and going back to the original question, if I think women, it was more difficult for women than men, I don't know, because if I look at our organization, I have seen that it was like a mixed feeling, that even the men were helping out a lot the women in the house, because they were at home. So I think even if they were working, it was a split, let's say, the responsibility of the household and all the problems involved. So in my case, I don't know. I think it was a general issue that it was very, it was really tragical for both, for women and men. So I can't see a real difference.
I mean, so many people had that, where they had to juggle different things, childcare as well. But if we focus particularly on women's sport in this question, Ebru, I'm going to bring you in here, because as women in football, I'm sure that you will have had responses on this. The fact that this poll suggests that the public perception is that women's sport suffered more. Would you agree with that?
Well, unfortunately, visibly, yes, because obviously in most of Europe, maybe with the exception of France, men's leagues returned and resumed. They're playing, and yes, there are, of course, some few cases coming up in each country, but pretty much it was controlled, and without spectators, the leagues could resume and continue. But when it came to women's leagues, with the exception of Germany, many of them stopped play. And of course, I can understand it and justify it with the financial aspect of it, because the testing requirements are quite rigid to return to play. And many of the clubs either didn't have the means to do it, or even if they had the finances, those funds could be better used for a stronger comeback for the next season. And especially about England, it was such a pity because it was the first season of the Barclays FAWSL, and it was a wonderful season, especially with the special weekends and the really heightened interest and everything. So on one hand, we were sad that it didn't restart, but on the other hand, we could understand the necessity and the reasoning behind it. The solidarity aspect in Germany, I think, was an example to many countries, because the top four clubs that were in Champions League stepped in to donate their share of the TV money, as well as some further funds, in order to help the lower leagues, the youth leagues, and the women's leagues. That was how it was able to restart. And then Premier League stepped in the UK. But I think what's important is this period also made all football stakeholders realize how, besides men's football, everything else was slightly behind, in this huge of growth in the last 2 decades. It was all about men's football and the top leagues, but the bulk of the pyramid is actually below that. And I'm sincerely hoping that return to the new normal involves a better embracement of what makes football beautiful, which is grassroots, youth football, women's football, all the different aspects of it. And I think all sports had similar problems in terms of bringing back women's part of that sport, and that was down to the financing situations, and the impetus of the sponsors hopefully will continue and grow exponentially, because the commercial potential and the growth potential of women's football is tremendous. I think it's definitely gives the biggest return on equity, return on investment opportunity going forward.
You started mentioning some other factors there, Ebru, which brings us in brilliantly for our second poll, actually, because you touched on some of them. And what we're asking, if you don't mind giving us a vote, is in which sector of the industry is it most necessary to promote women leaders? And is the answer A, clubs, leagues and federations, B, sponsors, brands, C, coaching staff, D, media, or E, all of them? I think we'll all have a wry smile and think it has to be E, all of them. Ornella, let's talk about boardrooms then. How do you see more women becoming boardies, trustees of different organisations? How do we get more women in the boardroom? And how do you see that changing over the next few years?
Well, I think generally in the future, boardrooms will be more balanced. Currently, there are some gender quotas on executives' body, but I believe that sooner or later, these gender quotas will disappear, because it will become a norm to have women as part of the decision-making process. There are many interesting talks and studies about how important it is to have women in the decision-making structure, and how much you can learn actually from women's leader. And I came across actually across a story, an interesting one about Porsche, the car making company, because in the 2 decades ago, actually, when the company was debating which type of new model to put on the market, it was actually a woman's idea to propose the Cayenne model. A different, unconventional type of car out of the land of Porsche history of producing icon sports car. And at that time, actually, there was a lot of pushback of the idea, but as it turned out, the introduction of Cayenne is credited to have saved Porsche financial position back then. So I think this is a great example of brave and innovative female leadership. And also, if we fast forward to the present moment and to these uncertain times we are currently in, I believe that one of the lessons of COVID-19 is that more women's leadership positions are needed to help deal with a crisis situation. If you look at the countries with some of the best COVID-19 responses, are countries led by women. If you look at Germany with Angela Merkel, but also New Zealand, Finland, Iceland. So these countries are countries that have stood out for their prompt, efficient, and effective response to the crisis. So I think it's now a time for football to step back, to reinvent ourselves. I think we have to improve the game. We have to get better. We have to reinvent the game. We have to create a more sustainable system. And I think here is where there is a huge opportunity for women. I believe women have a different mindset. They are more creative. They have a different imagination. They always think out of the box. So I think it's in this time of crisis where we actually need to have women in decision-making processes. And I really believe that it's time to lead that change.
So you think it's highlighted that more. Magda, you spoke of optimism going forward. So let's talk positives for a second. What has been your biggest success in your role to date?
Well, I think I'm sure that with no doubt it was to introduce the concept of stadium sponsorship or naming right in Italy. So our stadium Dutch Arena was the first naming right in Italy 5 years ago. And for me, it was really, it was a big thing, and I'm very proud of it. Also because also it's, it was the first case of sponsorship by a car industry worldwide. Now it's a more common practice. It's still quite difficult, because if we think about the Bundesliga, is about 80% of the stadiums are sponsored. In case of the Premier League, 30%, but in Italy there are only 10% of stadiums sponsored with naming rights. So it's quite a new concept in Italy. But I would say that's more interesting for me. I'm really fond and enthusiastic about the stadium in general. So I see and perceive it as an incubator of ideas, and an innovative incubator. So the stadium needs to live 565 days a year, and we need to we need to find contents to do that. So in our case, we have events, we have meetings, we have a restaurant for their players and their families. We have kids activities. We hold summer school management courses for university during summer. So we really try to give content, and this is what I'm really proud of. To really, let's say, I don't want to sound bad, but to really use football for as a mean to do many more things in a stadium than just just play a football game. And so this is, I think, what I've been very proud of, and I'm trying to do my best, and I will continue to do that.
And there were those fantastic sensory rooms as well at Watford, which have gone down brilliantly across the world and inspired many others. Ebru, how about the shortage of women that we've got in the top roles? As well as that, how do we address getting more diversity? And one of the very first questions that was posted on here before we started was from Jose, about also integrating disability into these roles as well. There's so much, isn't there, that still needs to be done?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the most important thing is obviously cultural barriers, because it was for decades and decades, football was seen as a white male, dominant industry, and it wasn't normal for girls and women, or people of color or different ethnic backgrounds to play, to be administrators in the industry, to be coaches, to be referees, and so on. So the most important thing is, first of all, change perceptions and showcase more role models, whether it's women, whether it's a disabled employee, whether it's somebody in the back office doing a marvelous job, and making sure that the opportunities are showcased and available to everybody. And the process of recruitment needs to start with this mind frame. Because a lot of the times, as the question answered by Ornella, first of all, when there is a posting, a new job posting, women don't think that it's for them. They think that it's for a white male once again. So the recruiters need to make sure that they gather and present a diverse shortlist of candidates. The selection panel needs to be a diverse selection panel, making sure that they can appreciate the qualities that diverse thinkers bring to the table. And there's no need to recite the business case for diversity, and especially having women on boards and senior leadership positions. There are several studies that show very clearly that if you break that groupthink, then the quality of decisions and the performance of companies, clubs, organizations improve. So once you're able to do a proper recruitment, then the onboarding process is extremely important. What we mean by that is, if you only have diversity in your list to tick a box, okay, you're just going to make somebody very, very miserable. Bring a woman into the board, or bring a woman into senior management, but if you don't include them, if you don't hear what they have to say, if you don't actively seek out their opinions, then there's no point in bringing that person. So it's extremely important to establish an inclusive culture in the organization, and that requires such a mind shift in many, many organizations. And it even starts with, conferences like this and seminars. And every time I'm asked to join one, I say, okay, how many of the speakers overall will be females? Can you make sure that there's no panel without a woman on it? And why am I saying that? Because there are enough amazing women in the industry who have such diverse backgrounds and experiences that others should hear from them as well. It shouldn't always be the same names speaking at every single event. There's a lot of responsibility on the media as well, to make sure that their agendas always reflect women's sports, women's leaders, give a voice to the women. And the importance of women in football comes into play in this aspect, especially because we've been, we have over 4,000 members right now, and what we've been able to do is provide that connection to the women. Many of them were working in their own silos, doing a wonderful job in their clubs or governing bodies all over the world, but they didn't realize there were many others in difficult situations, having not such an easy career path. But when they are able to see and compare notes, it makes them very comfortable, very happy to keep on working, and also trying to improve the condition for other women that are coming after them. So that whole inclusion and connection bit is really the missing piece in the whole diversity discussion. Then afterwards, obviously, very important, giving the right amounts of training, promotion opportunities to the women. And a lot of the times women do not have the confidence to try for new positions or apply for new things. But if you tap on the shoulder and say, why don't you give it a try to this new position, they will, and they will do an amazing job. So providing equal opportunities for promotion and training, and doing everything to retain them in the workforce, because Each woman that is in a visible decision-making position will inspire tens of thousands of others to follow in their suit. So it's not an easy journey. We've all been working at it for a long time, but I have so much faith in the younger generation of leaders because it comes to them naturally. I don't think
it does. It really does. Yeah. And I think visibility is one of the key things that you've hit on there, Ebru. Ornella, let's talk about this perception then that it's a bit of an old boys club, football boardrooms. In particular, let's refer to you and football governing bodies. I think people probably would think that around the world about governing bodies in football. So how easy is it for you as a woman to infiltrate decision making? And is there something there that's underlying as well?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to highlight that organization like FIFA stand out as very inclusive organization. Our general secretary is a woman, Fatma Samoura. We have many women in leadership positions. So it's really an organization that stands out. The feeling of a male-dominated world of an old boy club, as you said, Lynsey, is still there. Not at FIFA, I can say, but it's there in football. I always like to tell a story about my previous experiences in football. And I remember some years ago, actually it was a football agent. I was working with him in a transfer of football players to a club in Portugal. And he called me after we made the deal. He said, you've been amazing. You are very knowledgeable, whatever. But I think you should look for a job on TV because nobody will take you seriously in football because you're a woman. And actually, I realized that was the feeling that I was always experiencing of not being taken seriously. And also, at my time in Calcio Catania, in the football club, that was exactly the experience I was having all the time. And that was also the reason why I decided to quit the job at a certain point. Of course, after 10 years, the situation has changed. First of all, because the situation is different in this male-dominated world, but also because, of course, people get to know you, so you get a certain reputation and things changes. However, what I think is important is not just to have a job title and to be there somewhere in a board meeting or as head of professional football at FIFA. I think the most important thing is that you have to, to break the mold, to speak, to propose different things, not to have fear of proposing things that are different from the status quo. Honestly and personally, I always do that. I always said that I don't work to get a salary at the end of the month. I work to make the difference, to change things for the better. And I think this is also something I can share with other women. So it's not just me. I think it's in the women's DNA. But I can tell you, since you actually asked about FIFA, definitely is a very inclusive organization, and I'm an example for that. And we are able somehow to make some changes. Of course, in my position as head of league of professional football, I can do it with respect to, for example, the transfer reform. So I can propose things with respect to regulatory changes. But in general, all the other women a leadership position, they are definitely in a position to infiltrate decision making.
And that's so encouraging to see. And I think everyone around the world has noticed as well the investment in women's football that FIFA have done very recently and continue to show as well. Let's bring you up to speed with the polls then, ladies, because we don't have long left at all. I spoke about the one that was up, in which sector of the industry is it most necessary to promote women's leaders? Let's cut that one short because it was all of them. I think we all agreed with that one at the time. But there's a third one that's been running that you weren't aware of. Which of the following needs improving most in order for women's sport to continue growing? And the options were media coverage, storytelling, commercial strategies, improving access at grassroots level, more women on boards and others. Actually, at the moment, media coverage is winning that poll, 45%. Ebru, you're nodding along there. You agree?
Yeah, well, I think all of them are extremely important, but the media coverage, and going back to my point about perception and visibility, that's probably an important starting point to break this cycle. And once you have more visibility, it's going to encourage more women to come into the business. And I think that's probably a very important one to start with.
Magda, you look like you were in agreement as well. Anything to add?
No, I would say that it's a mixture of all of them. Of course, as well, more women on board will help because
which is why we're here.
But I think it's a mix of all the issues.
What is the one thing, and we'll just do this very briefly, that you would all like to see over the next 12 months, a move in a positive, forward-thinking direction? Start with you, Magda.
Well, I would like to, given maybe because we are so affected by this COVID, I would like to see more optimistic, let's say, thinking of going back to normal routine with the right procedures and try to go on this way and not to do so. I've seen.
Okay, Ornella. Oh, sorry.
I just hope that we can get the best out of these crises, that we can use the crisis as an opportunity to reinvent ourselves and to change things, to break the mold, and try to work for a better environment, a better football ecosystem, and a better world also for women in football.
Final few words from Ebru then.
Well, financial cliff, if we can sort of shrink it and make sure that we embrace and bring up all those that were left behind, whether it was on the field or in administration, but providing a bit more equality for all.
Such a key note to finish on. Ebru, Magda and Ornella, thank you so much for your time. You can see that David's popped up on the screen, which means we have to get out of here, and David's nodding along.
No, don't worry. I didn't want to rush you. I didn't want to hover at the side of the stage. But no, listen, I mean, I've really enjoyed this discussion. I've learned an awful lot through it as well. It's great to hear your various journeys, ladies, and starting off those notes that Ebru mentioned of self-awareness and building the support network and going through what Ornella was saying. It's really fascinating, actually, the mindset. We are, I guess, wired differently at our very base, men and women, and how important it is, this notion of confidence. And talking about the Porsche Cayenne example, Ornella, I never knew that. That's absolutely brilliant story. Really, really good. And speaking of cars, I guess the Dacia Arena, a great example from Magda, is an idea that was introduced there at Udinese Calcio, that the first club to introduce sponsorship and naming rights for a stadium. I didn't realise that actually only 10% of stadiums in Serie A have naming rights compared to Bundesliga, who have so many more. Also talk of, yes, reinventing the game and a more sustainable game, a different imagination, thinking outside the box. These are all things that women can bring to the table. And also really important note struck by Ebru about recruiters having to present diverse shortlist of candidates, and indeed the selection boards have to be diverse as well. That's really, really important. It doesn't matter, in terms of who they're looking at, but they themselves have to be diverse to reflect that. A fascinating session. Thank you so much, ladies. Really, really appreciate it. So Ebru, Magda, Ornella and Lynsey, many, many thanks to you four. We are going to take a very brief break now, but we're going to return at WFS Live, powered by Ronaldo. We're going to just focus on specific clubs who have been obviously impacted by COVID-19 and the coronavirus pandemic. We've got representatives from the Premier League, from MSL, from Italy and from Spain as well, as we continue on day one of our virtual conference. Do stay with us. We'll see you in just a moment.